with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, mune mune wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful and rainy neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you'll join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. And please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Stacey Woodson. She is here to celebrate the princess of picky eating tries new foods. Before we invite Stacey into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Lucas and the Game of Chance, written by Anthony Manna. While Lucas is playing the flute at the seawall one day, he befriends a mysterious talking, dancing snake that rewards him with fortune and favor. Some years later, tempted by greed and pride, Lucas loses all of his riches and his family. He must now set off on a treacherous journey through a frightening forest filled with suspense and strange creatures to find Destiny, her son Ilion, the sun, and her daughter Luna the moon. These celestial guardians will surely allow him to reverse his fortune, restore his honor, and win back all that he loves and treasures. Lucas and the Game of Chance is illuminated with dramatic and evocative pen and ink drawings that provide an ideal backdrop for the dark intrigue that fills this haunting story of human struggle, courage, and resilience. You and your kids are going to love it. It's Lucas and the Game of Chance, written by Anthony Manna. It is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read. Join us right now from the beautiful city of Philadelphia. Our guest is here today to celebrate, I think, a book that could make a huge difference in a lot of families' lives. The name of the book is Delicious and Nutritious, The Princess of Picky Eating Tries New Foods. Please welcome to the show author and registered dietitian and nutritionist, Stacey Woodson. Hey, Stacey, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
Delighted to have you on. This book about a princess of picky eating, I think, can hit home with a lot of folks. There are a lot of princesses and princes of picky eating out there in the world.
Absolutely. I have my own. That's how the book was conceived.
What is it, do you think, that makes kids, and not only kids, but adults? I mean, I have a niece in my life, and chicken fingers is about, all that she eats, and she's in college. So what is it that just makes some people just loathe to try something different?
There's a few things. The first thing is that some people are what we call super tasters. And so the way that they experience different flavors is extremely pronounced. So something that might have bitter undertones to somebody that's not a super taster is going to feel intensely different to them. And people don't even know that that's a thing. So if you have a super taster, then, that could be the reason why. Another reason why, and I think this is probably one of the most common reasons for children and adults, but we don't necessarily think of it that way, is that trying new things can be scary, just like anything else. So one of the pieces of advice that I always give parents and caregivers is that, you don't want to sit a new food in front of a child, especially a child that's reluctant to try new things in other areas of life as well. So you sit like this pile of peas in front of them and they're completely overwhelmed. Just like anything else, you kind of want to ease into it. And so I encourage giving 1 or 2 peas on a plate. They're probably not going to eat it the first time around. But each time they have a new experience with it, it becomes less and less scary. So eventually they'll be willing to try it. So the big thing that I think is important is to keep serving it. A lot of times parents and caregivers will stop serving it because they don't want to waste money, and says my kid doesn't like it, they're not going to eat it. Well, but then they no longer have any experiences with that food. So it's really important for it to still be around, even if they're not eating it.
Interesting. I want to go back just a little bit because you brought up something that I'd never heard of, and I'm imagining a lot of people listening have never heard of. This idea that there are people out there that are super eaters and they can taste things that mere mortal men and women can't taste. That's both that's both fascinating and I think a little terrifying because I know that there are some foods that are just like, that flavorful. Wow, this is really wild. This is great. But at the same time, I'm imagining if that was multiplied by 10 or 100, it would be overwhelming.
Right. Exactly. And so then you could imagine why these people, specifically children we're talking about, but these children would have difficulty trying new things because they don't know how intense. Like if it's a wonderful flavor, it's going to be great. But if it's not a wonderful flavor, it's going to be dramatic. Yeah. Right?
As we're talking about this, I'm flashing back to a meme I saw not too long ago on social media of this little kid being fed a kiwi. And you see the kid takes it in his mouth. He's very excited. He puts it in his mouth, and he just has this reaction like it's the most sour thing in the world. His face is all scrunched up, and he's shaking his head, and he opens up his eyes, and then it's like, I'm going right back in. I want some more of that. Is there a way for us to tell if our kids are super eaters? Are they also kids that have like this intense sense of smell? Is there a way for us to kind of determine, my kid is this super eating thing, or my kid's afraid? And if there is a way, are there different strategies for those two types of kids?
You know what? I honestly don't know how, like, clinically they would diagnose a super taster. I know that just anecdotally, one of the easiest ways, I've heard people identify is cilantro. Like, some people really love cilantro, myself included, but to most super tasters, it tastes like soap.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah. As
a fan of cilantro, I can't see how that can happen, but that's really good to know.
Yeah. And as far as management of this, I think it would be simply finding things that are most palatable in that food group. So for instance, like I mentioned, bitter foods are going to be extremely bitter. So if there's something that as a normal taster that's bitter, you probably want to look for foods in that same food group that are not as bitter. And so when I say food group, it's important. I'm sure most people have heard to eat a rainbow. So we want to eat green vegetables, and we want to eat purple vegetables and white vegetables and all these things. So instead of there being one specific food that you need to eat, making sure you find something within that category that you can choose to make sure that you're getting in all those different nutrients from that category provides.
That's really good advice. What would be good is for us to specifically talk about your book and who we're going to meet, and tell us about the adventure we're going to go on.
Sure. So I actually have a few books. The series is called Delicious and Nutritious. Once again, I'm a registered dietitian and a mom of 3. And I got the idea for this book, once again, inspired by my daughter, my princess. And that is why it's called The Princess of Picky Eating, Tries New Foods. And she was she was a great eater until she was like 2 or 3, which this is also very, very common for anybody that's listening with toddlers. So she was a great eater. And then one day when she was 2 or 3, she just stopped eating everything she used to eat. And I remember being like, this is insane. It's almost comical. It's so crazy. I should write a book about this. And I had no idea how to write a book. And fast forward, so I published this book. It'll be 3 years this fall. So she was about to be 7 when this book came out. So in that time period, that 5-6 year time period, I kept saying it, but didn't really think I was going to do it because I didn't have the tools to actually turn it into a book. And then the pandemic came, and, you know, we all had a little bit more free time. So me becoming an author was part of my pandemic activities, and all the pieces just aligned, and I was able to bring this book to life. And so it's a journey with a little girl that's named after my daughter, Sloan. And in the book, Sloan only eats foods that begin with the letter B. And her favorite phrase is, "No, thank you, not today, no way." So every time she's introduced with a new food, that is her response. And it's not until she is dared by one of her siblings that she actually tries these new foods and realizes that foods can be both delicious and nutritious.
Wonderful. What a fun story. And your book was brought to life like so many other books that we featured here on the podcast, thanks to the coronavirus. And so I don't think there are many things that we can thank the virus for, other than the fact that we brought a lot of books together. Actually, there's something else I think we can thank the virus for in the experience. Is I think that it brought out to people the fact that we may all go through the same experience, but we're not all in the same boat. And, you know, and I think that's something, I'm mentioning this now, kind of shoehorning this in, because I think we're forgetting that. And I think it's very important for us to realize that. And how does that play into nutrition and kids getting, you know, this variety of foods, especially when it comes to kids who are living in food deserts, where they don't have access to much more than, bags of chips and Ho-Hos from the neighborhood convenience store or bodega.
Yes, so that's actually one of my passions as well. I consider myself, along with being a dietitian and an author, I call myself a food activist, because it's really hard to say to someone, in a doctor's office or wherever, and just give them, you should eat more foods that are good for you when they don't have access to it. There's so many layers to this. So for this reason, I don't actually like to use the word healthy, because healthy insinuates that something is unhealthy, right? So I like to use nourishing. You want to choose more nourishing food choices, because at the end of the day, we don't know what people are, we don't know what's happening in people's homes. And so I encourage people to choose more nourishing foods more frequently, being mindful of the way that we speak of foods. And so if you think of a school situation, if you have someone that's coming from an affluent family and they can afford to buy all the fruits and vegetables that they want, organic produce, and they're sitting next to a child that isn't as fortunate in school, and maybe they're eating something that is quote unquote unhealthy. Remember, I don't like to use those words. And they say that's unhealthy, right? But this is all this kid has to eat. And then we have children feeling shamed to eat the foods that they have access to. So we have to be mindful of the way that we speak of foods. We have to be mindful that nourishing foods can come in different forms. Obviously, fresh, local, organic produce would be ideal, but frozen and canned foods can fit into a healthy diet. And what I'm a huge proponent of is growing your own food. So if fruits and vegetables are something that they can be costly, these nice types of produce is starting a home garden, even if it's one or two things that you eat frequently. So that is a big deal, especially in food deserts.
Yeah. How do you think, and obviously you're not going to solve the inequities of our food distribution for lack of me knowing how to say that, but how do you think we can make more nourishing food available to all people?
Like I said, I'm a huge fan of growing food. If people just understood that it doesn't take much. I happen to live in a city. I live in a row home, so I have no grass immediately around me, but I have a container garden in my back. I have a little garden plot. that I got from a local organization that comes out and installs them. And so we're growing fresh produce at home. If you have a windowsill, you can grow things like greens at home. I really do think that it starts there. I think that it also starts from organizations that are giving out food, like food pantries, making sure that they have access to perishable items, because, they usually give out non-perishable items, so they're shelf-stable, but making sure people have access to those. I think that there's a lot of infrastructure that would have to go into that, like funding, governmental funding, grant funding, to make sure that these organizations have the types of nourishing foods that they need to be able to support the public.
Yeah. What about, how do you think we can help our kids, obviously sitting down and talking to them about the way they speak with their friends at lunch, helping our kids know that, you have the kiwis and the mango, but your neighbor brings in chips and, they don't have access to the same food. Helping our kids know that the words that they speak can be hurtful and to not be judgmental. But what more can we do to help our kids understand that not everybody has the access to all these great foods, and give them the knowledge that, so that hopefully they'll grow up to support different causes and different groups that are trying to make food deserts disappear, and to try to make sure that everybody has access to this great nourishing food.
Well, I mean, it's so hard being a parent. I'm sure it's so challenging. But the thing that comes to mind is kind of getting outside of your neighborhood. When you're in your own neighborhood, there's familiar faces, there's things that are familiar. So maybe volunteering at a soup kitchen, volunteering in different places where there are people that are very different than yourself, and letting your children see firsthand that not everybody lives the way that you do. Because there's one thing to hear it, and there's another thing to see it and experience it. So volunteerism, and even if it's not about food, it could be just about, different neighborhoods people live in. And some places don't have trees. Some places have, a lot of buildings that are falling down, and rodents and pests and all kinds of things. So really leaving your comfort zone and finding maybe somewhere to volunteer would be a great start.
Yeah. You may be able to help me understand this. You may not. I don't know. It's one of those mysteries that may never be solved. But my son, who's now 30 years old and a great guy and a very adventurous eater, when he was a young one, when we went down to visit family in Puerto Rico, and somebody at the table ordered fried calamari. And when it came out, my son immediately asked, "What is that?" And I, in a stroke of genius, I think, I said, "Well, that's Puerto Rican onion rings." And he dug into them, and he just loved it, to the point where people were buying him plates of it the whole rest of the vacation. And for a year, anytime we went out, it was like, "Oh yeah, Puerto Rican onion," and he'd love it. But then there was one day that someone revealed the secret and told him what calamari was, and he never ate it again. And it's like, dude, it's the same thing. You love it. What's going on? How is? I don't. You're not a psychologist, but can you help me understand what was going on with my son?
I definitely think that when we eat, there's a lot that goes on in our thought process. We don't really think of that piece. But for whatever reason, what calamari actually is did not sit well. Did not sit well with him. And he's just like, he couldn't rationalize, like, oh, I thought it was this, and come to find out it's this. Mm-hmm. That's all I got. Sorry.
That's okay. Well, like I said, we've gone past it. He's a very healthy and successful adult right now. Tell me the princess of picky eaters tries new foods. First off, is your princess more adventurous nowadays with her eating?
She is, but she's still a picky eater. And so that is an important message for parents, is that it's not an overnight thing. When I first came up with the concept, she would eat like 2-3 things. And now here she is, years later. She's 9 right now. She'll be 10 this fall. And she eats so many more things than she did before, but she's still super picky.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it is, it's a work in progress. Yeah. You just keep at it.
Yeah. And I'm guessing yelling at kids and punishing kids, that's not really helpful in this area.
No, definitely not helpful. If anything, there's a few terminologies that we use when we talk about food. And that's more likely to have a food aversion. So an aversion is like you had a negative experience with a food and you avoid it for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so I definitely had some food aversions growing up. I don't happen to like cow's milk. And I remember being forced, and I felt like I wanted to vomit. And like, I want nothing to do with cow's milk right now. Like you would have to pay me millions of dollars to drink a glass of milk because of those experiences. Mm-hmm. Another thing that's very common and especially in toddlerhood is called food jags. And this is when the toddler wants to eat the same things over and over and over again. This can be completely normal and most children do grow out of it. And once again, it's important to still have those other foods on the plate so they can see them. And then there's something that we call the division of responsibility. And I think this is probably one of the most important messages that parents can really hear and just kind of just start to relax. And the division of responsibility says that it is the parent's decision to decide what to serve, when to serve it, and where to serve it. And so I'll give you an example. We're having fish and broccoli and rice, so that's what, at 6 p.m., that's when, and we're going to sit at the dinner table, that's where. It's the child's responsibility to decide how much, and it might be 0. Mm-hmm. And that's when we start to get all like, as parents, like, oh my gosh, they're not getting enough. They're not going to grow. They're not going to be healthy and all these things. But children have the innate ability to know what they need that most adults have learned how to override. And so we just eat because it's mealtime and not necessarily because we're hungry. So really letting the children decide how much. Some days you might notice that your children eat a whole lot, and other days they might eat very little. And as adults, we have those days too, right? But we're not growing the way that they are, so we're not really worried about ourselves. But when we really think of them as humans, that makes complete sense.
Yeah. A great piece of advice our pediatrician shared with us when my kids were younger is they'll eat when they're hungry. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, wow. I'm glad you went to medical school and you know that. You shared that with me.
Absolutely.
I love this. And one of the things that we encourage families to do here in the podcast is cook with their kids. Is that something that is helpful in terms of getting kids to be more adventurous and have a more diverse palate?
Oh, absolutely. I think having hands-on experience, you're emotionally invested. Actually, so once again, I have three children, and the main character in my book is named Sloan, which is the daughter that I'm about to mention. So Sloan, my pickiest of my eaters. One day we were bored and I didn't feel like cooking. I was like, you know what? I'm going to offload this task. Let's see if I can like get her to buy in. And I was like, all right, let's make a soup. And let's think about all the different pieces of the soup. Like you have a base, right? So what kind of base do we want? Sometimes we have just a vegetable broth base. Sometimes it's a creamy base. So we went with a creamy base. And then I was just like, what kind of protein do we want? And so I think she chose kidney beans. And like, what type of pasta or carbohydrate would you want? And she chose, I think she chose penne. And so we went through all the different, what kind of vegetables do you want? What type of flavorings do you want? And it didn't look very pretty, but I tell you, at the end of the day, it was delicious. And it is now a family favorite. And she always asks, can I make Sloan soup? And I'm just like, if we have all the ingredients, absolutely. Because now I don't have to cook. And it's something that you'll eat. Absolutely.
Awesome. I love that you called it Sloan soup too.
Yes.
Yeah. There's so many things that my kids ate when they were growing up that they created their own names for, and we just like, okay, you like that? That's what we'll call it. And to the point we go out to restaurants and order it too. And, the kids, the waiters and waitresses were like, oh, what is that? And we'd have to tell them.
Yeah, so just give them like the paradigm, like, all right, let's choose a protein, let's choose a vegetable, let's choose a grain, let's choose a fruit, and then let them create. And you'll be surprised what they come up with, and what you don't have to do.
There you go.
And that they're more likely to eat it.
Well, one of the things we have to do is to ask you where we can go to find out more about you and find out more about the Princess of Picky Eating.
Sure. So my books are available wherever books are sold online, but I always point people to my website, which is Stacey, Stacey, Woodson, WOODSON.com. There is a book tab there, and you'll be able to see all of the different books in the Delicious and Nutritious series. And I forgot to mention, although there is the Princess of Picky Eating, I have the same exact book, but it is the Prince of Picky Eating Tries New Foods as well. So
awesome.
For people that don't identify as princesses, I have a Prince book version as well.
We've had a great time speaking about food and helping our kids become more adventurous and helping us understand what's going on in the minds and the palates of our picky eaters with the author of Delicious and Nutritious, The Princess of Picky Eating Tries New Foods, Stacey Woodson. Hey, Stacey, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Fiona Halliday. She'll be here. We hope you'll be with us too. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Stacey Woodson. Please be sure to check out The Princess of Picky Eating Tries New Foods. You can also check out The Prince of Picky Eating Tries New Foods. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Soji Franklin, Ann O'Leary, Madison Dieris, Monica Rivera Sosa. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.